So here's the thing, Jimmy. I've got to, 4 times a year, I confess, I defer to you, and I go, you know what, I was wrong about that. I was completely off base, right?
Okay. It happens so rare, you'll have to forgive me. I don't know what number we're on. We're running out of days in the year. So
well, I've got one left between now and the end of the year. I had mentioned when the Pacers went up and played in Toronto the first time that I was somewhat impressed by like their grit and their resilience because they were very shorthanded. And you were the one that pointed out, you're like, dude, Toronto's terrible.
Yeah.
Like, Decatur Central should be able to hang with them, right? And I realized they had Scotty Barnes back last night versus matchup number 1 up there, but and I don't think he played up there in matchup number 1. I could be wrong on that, but I don't understand what happened last night. I've had time to sit here and digest it, and I actually had this uncomfortable epiphany because I'm watching the game, and we actually did our Christmas tree last night, so it was kind of on off to the side, right? And so I'm looking at the game, and I look at the score, and it was like a 10 or 12-point game, and then I put up literally 2 ornaments, and I turn around, and they were down 21 or something. And I thought to myself, how in the world versus Toronto are you down 20-plus points? So I said, I'm going to have to pay attention here. I sit down, and right as I sit down, Carlisle puts in Obi Toppin. And it is literally like watching Robin Williams take the stage on a late-night TV show. Like, the energy level just goes from 4 to, like, 15. And Obi Toppin is getting steals, and Obi Toppin is hitting threes, and Obi Toppin is scoring on a three-point play. And I'm not saying that Obi Toppin does that every single night, don't get me wrong. But you do have games sometimes where you have one guy that you're like, man, this guy just was totally dialed in, totally energetic, totally on point. And when Obi Toppin was on the floor, all of a sudden they're within 3. They had 4 straight possessions at one point. It was the most frustrating thing ever. They had 4 straight possessions with the chance to get it within, I think, to get it to 1 maybe.
Trying to tie or take the lead. Late.
Yeah, whatever. And just nothing's going, right? And some of the decision-making was probably questionable. But then I realized, wait a minute, what's up with the rotation here? Because Toppin went out and seemingly, I'm not going to say he never came back in. And I get it. I mean, I get that you want to go with the horses that you rode in on. But when you've got a hot hand sometimes, you've got to stick with that hot hand and just ride with it. And so, I thought to myself, Toppin played 14 minutes. He had 15 points in 14 minutes. He was a plus 17. I don't necessarily always get into those metrics, but I will in this case because it was very obvious to the eye that when he was on the floor, better things were happening. Jarris Walker played 26 minutes, didn't hit a shot. Okay? Obi Toppin played 14 minutes and was a difference maker when he was on the floor. I didn't understand what was going on there. And so I went to bed thinking to myself, okay, in what ways are we going to critique the Pacers tomorrow, and is it worth me saying that I thought their effort was embarrassing?
You didn't go to bed thinking, ba,
Okay,
ba.
okay.
That's a bold roll of the dice at 12:04.
I got plenty of sleep. I finally got rested up. I cleansed it out of my head. Now, I do have a dilemma going on, though, that made me restless. I do have a dilemma, which I'll get to. But it has nothing to do with the world of sports. But I was very relieved right before I went to bed because I didn't have to worry about the Oompa Loompa song, because I didn't have to worry about insomnia, and I didn't have to worry about getting, once again, stuck on Charlie Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Charlie Chocolate Factory, whatever the hell it's called, because of the fact that I thought if there was just some sort of a reprieve or lifeline where I don't necessarily have to go on and completely napalm the Pacers, not because I'm opposed to napalming them, not because I'm afraid to napalm them, but because in reality they played 22 games. And I have always said it usually takes 25 games before you truly know the identity of a team. And they've been banged up, and they've been hurt and whatever else. But I thought if there was just somebody else that could word it for me. And lo and behold, oompa, loompa, doopa-dee-doo. I've got the perfect answer for you. Yes, indeed, it came. Tyrese Halliburton had this to say, and I saw it on social media, and I thought, there you go. I don't have to say it because their leader said it for me.
The product we're putting on the floor right now as a group is embarrassing, and I think we answered the conversation we had at halftime. I think we answered that in the second half better, but it's got to be like that for 48 minutes. Every team is playing hard right now. Every team is young and has energy, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be matching that and beyond. So, I just think the product that we're putting out there on a nightly basis right now needs to be better because we work too hard. Too many people care. You got too much pride in it. So the product has to be better, and I think just the effort has to be better. And if it's not, then he's going to keep playing around with lineups, playing around with different guys to figure out what's going to put the best product on the floor.
Okay, two things here. Number one, that sounded almost like Shaq. Tyrese Halliburton usually, and I realize it's after a loss, it's a little bit different, but usually he is a lot more upbeat. That sounded like a guy that almost felt defeated and just mailed in. Understandably. I mean, they just got beat. But secondly,
his voice is always weird, by the way. Like, I love Tyrese, but there's moments where the cadence right? and the tone changes mid go-around. But anyway, go ahead.
But here's my thing with Halliburton. To be a leader, I don't have a problem with him right there calling out his teammates, essentially. Didn't do it by name, right? But as a group, just calling out the team himself. I guess, somewhat maybe including himself. I don't know.
He said we. Enough.
But he says that after a game where he goes 10 of 16, scores 30 points, and has 6 assists. Does he say those things after the games where he is 2 of 12 from the floor? Maybe he does. I commend him for calling out his teammates. I just hope that this is, or calling out just their effort in general. I just hope that this is something that he realizes it has to be a nightly thing, not just the nights where he performs well and others do not. Because he's the leader of the team. He is the leader of the team. And, I mean, Miles Turner would be as well, Siakam as well. But when you are the guy that's getting the max contract, that's the all-star, that's the straw mixing the drink, that makes you the leader of the team. And that sort of a fire and drive of, guys, we got to figure this out, we got to play harder, and we got to quit beating. When he said the word embarrassment, we're an embarrassment. That's a pretty heavy word to use. And last night to go into Toronto and for a team that has won 6 games going into it, be down 20+. I know it's on the road, but on a floor that looks like somebody spilled Kool-Aid all over it, that's embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it all season, and I think why he felt the need to speak out last night is to the point that you referenced, Jake, which is you're getting to a point in the year about 25, 30 games in where you know what your team is at this point. And yes, they're still going to get a reinforcement in Nesmith when he rejoins at some point in the coming weeks, and they haven't gelled together at full strength over the course of this NBA season. But they're also, through 25 games, half of them have been on the road, and they're 2-10. Eddie pointed this out to start the season, one of his biggest concerns, and it's continued to come to fruition. You drop a halfway above average wing player on an opposing team, they're going to drop 30. They're going to have a career high night, and you're going to have to overcome that defensively as a unit that's about 25th in the league. In regards to Tyrese Halliburton, though, as the star, he has struggled. I think that acknowledgement was encapsulated by not just what they did in Toronto, but him acknowledging the fact that he has been in part a portion of that embarrassment to start this season. Now, he has a great night last night. You could go throughout game by game this season. He's had so many good performances at home that I wouldn't go as far to say his best game of the year. Easily his best game on the road, though. He's finally attacking off the dribble. He's seen more deliberate and less, whether it was because of pain tolerance or just matchup decision-making. He seemed more aware of the need to attack the basket and not shy away from contact, and I felt like that was the Tyrese Halliburton we saw on a nightly basis, road or home, a year ago. The question for him that you've asked fairly and that Pacers fans are asking fairly is what we saw last night and what we saw over the 4-game homestand last week, a return to form for him and he's turned a corner, or is this just a blip on the radar? And larger, the whole team, only one immune to road struggles to this point in the year was Pascal Siakam, and he had his worst game of the season, maybe his worst game as a Pacer last night. So they have so much to clean up, so much to figure out. But I think Tyrese Halliburton, when he makes those statements, just to clarify it on my end, is not just calling out his teammates. I think he knows internally he has been a part of that embarrassment, and it's something, especially on the road to the lifeless Raptors, they need to figure out.
College football rankings came out, and Indiana is, in fact, obviously, as we know, in. One would assume that they stay in. I just can't see any sort of movement around. There are teams that might be victimized by surprises in the final weekend here, but I don't think Indiana's going to be one of them, Jimmy.
I want to tip the cap again, and I know he just got Big Ten Coach of the Year honors, but I want to tip the cap again to Curt Cignetti, because if you wanted to know where the margins were for Indiana to solidify a spot in the playoff, it was one loss. If they're a two-loss team with who they played and what the makeup of their schedule was, and you saw what just happened to Miami at the hands of Alabama, you'd be in the Cheez-It Bowl. And Indiana fans started the season to go to a bowl game and be a part of that, probably would have taken that. But if I was to tell you how the season played out, you'd probably be pretty frustrated today. I know we don't want to waste a whole segment on this, but to encapsulate it quickly, Bama losing to Oklahoma the way they did was a death sentence for me. I understand the SEC bias that we talked about. It didn't appear the committee was as aggressive towards that leading up to this week's rankings. But if Miami, who had 2 losses, and granted, 2 of them were to unranked opponents, and they had a 21-point lead at Syracuse that they blew. But if Miami at 2 losses gets bounced over Alabama with 3 losses, one of which to a terrible Oklahoma team, Indiana would have had no shot. So for Cignetti to navigate it the way that he did, we talked about, strength of schedule, all that. Jake, you highlight them as the losingest football program in Division I history for a reason. They don't go near perfect very often. So for them to handle their business, take care of their business, and have that tiny window of error, which is 1 loss against a good team, to still get in, I tip the cap to Curt Cignetti for being able to navigate all of this. Because Bama being in is insane.
Here's the thing, Jimmy. I'm going to push back on that, okay? Let's put the objectivity aside here, okay? You are a fan of what team of college football?
I grew up a Notre Dame fan. They are my truest form of fandom, but went to Indiana. I'm here for the IU ride as well. But yeah.
So you are saying that Alabama, if they were to be left out, the team that should go in would be who?
Based on who got snubbed because of this, Miami.
Okay. So here's my question. You're a Notre Dame fan.
Sure.
Deep down, truth serum. You're going to walk into – Shannon and I watched that rugby match at the Globe Bar in Edinburgh, Scotland, one of the best sports bars I've ever been in. Awesome. Loved everything about it. So I'm going to take you to the Globe Bar in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Okay.
You're going to walk in, and what we don't know, because it's Scotland and we're in another country, is that somebody is actually going to put inside your attendants a truth serum.
Nice.
Okay? So you sit down right then. I go, okay, Jimmy, truth serum. This is the college football playoff. Your season ends if you lose right now, but if you win, you advance with a chance to still win a national championship. Would you rather your Notre Dame Fighting Irish play Alabama or Miami?
Based on, I understand this is a cop-out, but based on this season, neither of them scare me. I won't care. It does not matter to me. I think they match up well with both.
But which team, if you really look at it, which team do you feel like
probably
If I said to you, there's a team here, I'm from the future, and I'm looking at this, and I know that there is one team that is going to flip a switch and all of a sudden blaze through the college football playoff. You don't know which team it is, and it's not one that gets an automatic bye. Would you feel in your heart that it is more likely that team is Miami or Alabama?
Prior to this season, I would have said Bama, but I don't trust this version of Alabama. Like, that's me answering the question honestly. I don't trust Kalen DeBoer in Alabama this year. This is not Nick Saban's Tide.
I don't trust Miami.
Yeah, I think Alabama, the reality is that the reputation that they've earned for themselves over the last decade is undeniably a factor in why Alabama has earned benefit of the doubt more than Miami.
For 3 losses?
Yes.
They have wins over Georgia. They have a win over Georgia. That's better than any win on Miami's schedule. Miami's best win is Louisville.
What's Notre Dame's best win?
You could argue it's Louisville, Navy, Army. At the time, were good wins.
To the point, I mean, I realize that Alabama
but they also
has,
only lost once. Bama lost 3 times. Like, at what point does that not matter?
Okay, but again,
they also padded the schedule with a win over Mercer to close November.
Okay, again, Notre Dame, though, their loss to Northern Illinois. Who are Alabama's losses?
Oklahoma.
Alabama lost to Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt.
All 3 of which are better than Northern Illinois, for example.
Miami,
I'm not saying Notre Dame doesn't belong there.
Miami blew a 21-point lead to Syracuse and lost 28-23 to Georgia Tech.
I'm just saying the reality is that Alabama, when you get down into the 11, 12, 13 area, I am a firm believer in human bias and emotion. And deep down, I think that the branding of Alabama and Georgia carry with it more oomph in this 2024 than do even Miami or other programs, because you look at it and you go, you know what? There is an it factor about Alabama. There just is. There is an it factor. If you were to talk to coaches and you're like, which team are you? You're like, man, I don't know, Alabama. I mean, these guys, they're battle tested. They've been through this before. The players that are at Alabama went to Alabama for these moments.
My overall point was not to go to bat for Miami here. My overall point was to say this would have happened to Indiana if they were in the same threshold as Miami was, and it reaffirms what people were worried about going into the college football playoff, those that aren't in SEC country, which is that teams in the threshold of 3 losses are going to have the opportunity to still get in, when you would think for most teams it would be a death sentence. And for the Big 12, which again, I thought the Big 12 was weak this year. I'm not going to fight necessarily for Arizona State or Iowa State, but the SEC bias gets shown in great detail when you can still be in the conversation as a 3-loss team because you're the Crimson Tide, who have had a coaching change, who don't look like the same world beaters like resume that you're talking about, prestige that Saban built for them the last 20 years. And I worry it's a harbinger of things to come for teams in the margins moving forward.
I mean, there are 4 Big Ten teams
season.
in there, right?
Sure.
So, I don't know that there's necessarily the bias of I do think that running through the SEC is a gauntlet.
Okay, so
that
tell me this
allows
then.
you an extra win versus other conferences.
So tell me this then: if SMU and you could look at different metrics of the SEC and say it was a down year for the conference, and they're largely going off of brand bias because it's what the SEC is. But let's say SMU loses to Clemson.
Yeah, they're out.
I think SMU should be in over Bama.
They will be.
I would disagree.
That's what people say is going to happen, Eddie, that they will be. I don't think they will, because I think the inherent bias towards, let's have Bama in there, let's give them a 4th bite at the apple.
But they've already said that they will not factor in.
Except for that matchup. They dodged the question on SMU Clemson. They did say that most games would not be impacted, but when directly asked about that game, they deferred. I think if SMU loses, they're going to get snubbed and Bama's going to get in.
SMU's schedule: Nevada, Houston Christian, BYU, where they lost, TCU, Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, Duke, Pitt, Boston College, Virginia, California, and Clemson. And if they lose to Clemson, that means that, Louisville and I guess Pitt at the time was a decent win. Okay. I'm not saying SMU's not good, but SMU and Clemson to me are in a totally different category than Alabama and Georgia. In my opinion.
I don't. Georgia and Bama, even though Bama beat them earlier in the year, I don't view Georgia and Bama in the same plane this season. I think the Tide are riding on the coattails of Saban's legacy. It's been a bad year for them. And I think if you told
But you can't say that about Georgia when Alabama beat them.
I think if you told most Bama, clearly that doesn't matter either. We saw that with Florida State last year. If you ask most Bama fans today, hey, you didn't get in because you lost to Oklahoma,
I'll tell you this.
I think they'd understand that.
I'll tell you this. If you had and we're going to talk, by the way, nationally. Adam Rittenberg going to join us from ESPN in just a couple of minutes. We'll get further into this. If you were to, it is my opinion. I'm not saying it's fact. It's my opinion. If you were to take, who are the 3 best teams in the country right now? Who would you say are the 3 favorites to win the college football national championship?
Oregon, Texas, and probably Georgia.
Okay. You think Georgia, really? They were beaten by lowly Alabama, right?
If you're going,
you can't trust Penn State.
If you're going off of rankings, you're asking me to throw Penn State or my Irish in there.
I think a lot of people would say Ohio State
Notre Dame.
or Notre Dame. But what I'm saying is this: if you were to ask those 3 coaches, Each of them. You get to pick one team that does not have a bye, and you can make yourself immune to facing them. I'll bet you more of those coaches would say Georgia or Alabama than would say any other team. I'll bet you Georgia and Alabama would get more votes than any other team.
I mean, but you're asking that fight to be against IU, Boise State, or who am I missing?
If you took, for that matter, if you took a survey of all of the coaches, I mean, obviously people are going to say I don't want to face Oregon because they're number 1 right now, and I think Ohio State would be feared by a lot of people. Outside of that, I think 3 and 4 would be Alabama and Georgia. I do. I think that coaches would say, yeah, those guys have an ability to flip a switch. When you watch the Alabama-Georgia game, you are watching it going, this is a totally different level of college football. And yes,
I agree with you on that.
I'm not saying they should be committed for it. Maybe their game dips a bit when they're playing a Vanderbilt. But the reality is, in the college football playoff, the committee's job is to come up with the teams that give the most exciting, tantalizing, and even matchups 1 through 12. And when they do that, they look at it and they go, in that situation, it is our belief that Alabama and Georgia give us a greater chance of a dogfight game that people are going to watch than would an SMU or a Miami or a South Carolina. There's just a branding that comes into that.
They're not putting Alabama, whose best win, again, is against Georgia, and I give them credit for that. That was also week 4 of the college football season.
They have wins over Georgia, Missouri, LSU, and South Carolina.
LSU's win is a stat pattern that everybody has from that conference. LSU was objectively trash this year.
Agreed.
Brian Kelly knows it. The Tigers know it. Everybody knows it. Like, that's an inflated win that people are pointing to defend Bama's resume. My larger issue is this. For Alabama, it has nothing to do with the Georgia win. It has everything to do with, Jake, like you outlined, right or long, their legacy.
That's exactly what I said.
And past prestige.
No question.
And that's not what this should be about. It's not about that. It doesn't matter what happened in 2020. It matters what happened in 2024.
But guess what? You know the reason why Indiana, a lot of times in Bob Knight's later years, got blown off the floor by Colorado? Because they got into the NCAA tournament based on the fact that their jersey said Indiana.
Doesn't make it right.
I'm not saying it does, but that's my whole point, is that the brand bias does come into play. But we'll talk about this. I have a dilemma that I need your guys' help with today as well. Not a dilemma, but just one of those things that makes you go, which we'll get to. But we got a loaded show. Adam Rittenberg going to join us next. John Fanta, one of our favorites at 1 o'clock. Dustin Dopirak, right? Did I say that right?
Dopirak.
Thank you. Covering the Indiana Pacers at 1:30. Zach Keefer at 2 o'clock. There's news on Andrew Luck that Zach has been obviously somebody who has chronicled Andrew Luck, but we're going to talk NFL and Colts and Andrew Luck's new gig with Zach Keefer coming up at 2 o'clock today. A reminder between now and the end of the year. For example, if you are Miami, you are SMU, you're looking at your resume and you're saying to yourself, you know what, this is the last push here. We got to keep things clean. We got to make sure that we're cleaning things up. What does Shane Steichen say about his football team? He's got some things cleaned up. It's the end of the year. You want to make sure your car's cleaned up, right? That's why you've got a monthly car wash program on your car, but you want to make sure that the underbody of it is just as clean. That's why you go to Jiffy Lube. And when you go to Jiffy Lube between now and the end of the year, so just a couple weeks left, folks, if you are a member of a monthly car wash program and you have that sticker in your windshield or on your license plate, simply point it out to a Jiffy Lube team member when you arrive. And, of course, no appointment necessary at Jiffy Lube. Point it out, though, and you're going to get $20 off your signature service oil change and a free tire rotation at Central Indiana Jiffy Lubes between now and the end of the year. Jiffy Lube, of course, is your one stop for all your vehicle maintenance needs, and you never need an appointment. Adam Rittenberg does have an appointment, and it is with this program in just under 5 minutes. Now, somebody told me the other day, you guys are better at this than I because, you're young and hip, that this band had like a very short shelf life and then they became uber cheesy. Is that true or not true? That song was huge. I mean, I remember that. But once the guy got on the bird wire and started flying around at halftime of a Thanksgiving game in Dallas, didn't everybody go, what is going on here? And then they had their Christopher Cross moment and that was it.
Yeah,
Am I right?
Yeah.
You could be right, yeah.
Now, I'm reliant on you guys to keep me up to speed on what's hip and what's cool, man. I mean, you see the amount of gray I got going on here? I need help.
Didn't know if you were like Ryan Day.
You're
just for men over there.
Ryan. Yeah, no, I'm Ryan Day, which means if you guys start fighting, I'm just going to stand here and watch.
In
have
shock
no idea what's going
and confusion.
on. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that segue. You can read his work covering college football with ESPN. Adam Rittenberg joining us on the program. Adam, I'll get right to this. We obviously here in Indiana, and whoever would have guessed this would be the case, where there would be two schools from the Hoosier State represented as of right now in the college football rankings. With last night's ranking and the way that they were slotted, was there anything that overly surprised you?
Well, I think there was certainly a lot of intrigue about how the SEC teams would be sorted and certainly where Miami would fall after the loss to Syracuse. Would Miami still be ahead of a team like Alabama or would they be behind? And unfortunately for them, they fell behind. And now it's hard to see a path for the Canes to get ahead of the Tide with neither of them playing this weekend in championship games, and Miami not having played either Clemson or SMU during the regular season. So that's probably how I think if I'm an Indiana fan, you're sitting there right on the cusp of possibly hosting a playoff game, probably not. But obviously things could shake out this weekend that really changed the order here. You have Texas loses to Georgia for a second time. How far do they fall? If Georgia loses the SEC title game after being very fortunate to beat its rival or in-state rival Georgia Tech last Friday night in that 8-0 overtime game, how far do they fall? So, in some ways it is a benefit to not be playing this weekend because your profile is your profile and you can stand on it right now with the committee.
Do you believe that the ACC will be a multi-team league?
I do if SMU loses a close game to Clemson,
So
and that would be really unfortunate. I mean, let me just put this out there as my opinion. It would be incredibly unfortunate to leave SMU out in that situation if they were to lose the ACC title game. I don't think that's what the college football playoff is about. I don't think you expand this thing to 12 teams for that scenario for a team to go undefeated in its conference, lose one close game with a different quarterback really early in the season, lose in the conference championship game, and get knocked out of the playoff.
So in that situation, Adam, if let's say Clemson beats SMU, 38-35, right? So Clemson is in, and let's say that they bring SMU in with them. That then bounces who? Are you saying Alabama is the one that they go, hey, sorry, man, because you just got bounced based on a bid stealer?
Correct. Yeah. Because, I mean, you just look at these rankings, and I don't think the committee is going to change the order of teams that don't play on the final weekend. So, Alabama would be out. And, again, what do they do with SMU? Would they consider dropping them below Alabama? I think they would say that they would. But I do think at the end of the day they would keep SMU in the rankings because of what it would mean. We've had all this conversation about, is it better to be in the conference championship game with a chance to get a bye into the quarterfinals, or is it be better to be sitting out like in Indiana is, like Tennessee, Ohio State, so forth? If you were to drop SMU out of the entire field in that scenario, you were essentially saying it's better to be left out of the championship game.
Okay, so in other words, Adam, tell me if and I flunked algebra, so have a heart here, okay? I finally passed it. It was my 8th attempt. Is it safe to say that because it would appear as though there is only one conference championship that has in it a team that can steal a bid, meaning Clemson, meaning any other conference championship game features teams that would be in regardless? So is it safe to say that because there's only one potential bid stealer and Indiana has the comfort of Alabama below them, that theoretically there is not a scenario now where two teams get in and Indiana gets pushed out?
I don't see that happening. I don't know how you would explain that from a committee standpoint after what you said last night. Yes, Ohio State, a team that Indiana lost to, has fallen, but they only fell to number 6. So what about Indiana's profile is going to change based on this weekend? I don't see anything. What about Alabama's profile or Miami's profile? I don't see that changing dramatically, other than the fact that Alabama will have beaten potentially the SEC champion in Georgia if Georgia beats Texas for the second time. So, I think Indiana's safe, probably on the road in the first round.
Adam, going back to your point about being penalized for playing in a conference championship game and as strong as a season as SMU had, I'm not happy about Alabama being in the field as a 3-loss team. I'm not a Miami fan. They haven't snubbed anybody that I'm involved with. I don't think it's – I think it's going off of merit in the Georgia win versus anything else. It's a long-winded way of saying you gave the caveat if SMU loses close to Clemson. Granted, I haven't been impressed with the Tigers all year. If they win by 2 or 3 scores – does SMU still get penalized for being in the conference championship game and they put Bama in over them, in your mind, based on what the committee has done already?
I think there would be a very interesting discussion that would go on. But I think the one counter to that would be, and this is why it's so important that it's Alabama ahead of Miami and ahead of South Carolina and Ole Miss, is that Alabama was blown out at Oklahoma, a worse team. If SMU gets blown out to Clemson, I think there'd be a lot of people in that room that say, okay, so what? Alabama went out and didn't show up at all out of Norman and lost to a very average Oklahoma team. So why are we still pushing SMU behind them? But I think that would be a more interesting discussion for sure. I don't think that's going to happen, but it would definitely, I think, create a little bit more angst in that committee room if it did.
If that happens and chaos ensues with a bid stealer like Clemson, is there a world with ranking shift where Indiana could move up to host a game, or are they pretty much locked into where they're at of being on the road?
Well, right. So, yeah, so I think that then you would just have potentially Boise State hosting a now if UNLV wins and Clemson wins, I'm trying to do the math here. It's still top 4 conference champions. It would still be a 5th team playing in that first round as a conference champion. I think it would be difficult for them to move all the way up into a hosting position, but yeah, it would be interesting just to see the conversations in the room. It just feels like a lot of this is set now, guys. I mean, I think Ohio State's going to host a playoff game. Notre Dame's going to host a playoff game. We'll see about Tennessee. We'll see what happens with the outcome of Texas and Georgia and how far the loser falls in that order. But seeing where Indiana is at 9, I think it's hard to see them hosting at this point.
But here's the thing, and I'm going to show my ignorance here. So Boise State right now has a bye because they are not one of the Power Fours, but they are ranked higher than the prospective winner of the Big 12. Thus, they are in as a bye, correct?
Correct.
So if Boise State were to lose to UNLV, UNLV steals that automatic bid into the 12. Does Boise State fall itself all the way out, and does that then put the Big 12 winner into a bye and Boise State having to fall into a situation where they've got to play, if they even stay in, play in round 1?
I think Boise State would be out for sure. The Mountain West isn't getting 2 in.
Okay.
Neither is the Big 12.
So there is another potential bid stealer, if you will, in UNLV, but that wouldn't change the numbers because Boise State would be out. That would simply change the fact that Arizona State would theoretically, or the winner of the Big 12 would get the bye, correct?
Unless they feel that the UNLV win over Boise State is enough to push UNLV ahead of the Arizona State,
right.
Iowa State winner, because you're beating number 10 if you're UNLV, whereas Iowa State would only be beating the team ranked right ahead of them, and Arizona State's beating a team behind them. So it would just be an evaluation of and UNLV, they have 2 wins against Big 12 opponents this year, had a really close loss to Syracuse, had a really close loss to Boise. You could maybe make that case that they belong ahead of the Big 12 winner. Certainly would not like to be in the Big 12 office if that happens. That wouldn't be a fun day.
Do you think the committee, when they finalize everything, and it looks like they did at least from this second to last ranking, will they try to avoid same conference matchups in the first round? Do you think that'll have any impact in their final ranking?
They say that it won't and that they are comfortable with rematches. I just think it's going to be tough. And, this is still a TV operation. And you certainly want to create, if it's really, really close, you want to create some compelling games and ideally avoid those matchups in the first round. But they will absolutely come out and say, no, this is how we had them ranked.
Adam, answer this as best you can. I'm going to ask you to speak for a group of people, which is dangerous, I realize. Do you think outside the borders of the state of Indiana, nationally speaking, that people believe in Indiana, or they simply look at the resume and go, you know what, they only have one loss and it was to Ohio State, so we got to put them in?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of skepticism out there, because people either saw that final score or they saw the second half and Indiana's struggles to move the ball. I think those of us who really studied that game saw that it turned on a couple of special teams plays, but Indiana really did have a hard time at the line of scrimmage, getting anything going against that Buckeyes defense. And so, but Ohio State's really talented, and when Ohio State wants to be there and plays to its capability, they may be the best team in college football. The problem is they certainly did not look that way last week. So that in some ways devalues Indiana a little bit. Although it's interesting, guys, having been at the Indiana-Michigan game, you look at the way Michigan has played since the second half of Indiana, and they've played really well. I mean, they were right there with Indiana with a chance to win. They blew out Northwestern, and then they obviously found a way to beat a much more talented opponent on the road in Ohio State. So, maybe Michigan is in a little bit different place, and that Indiana and Ohio State are not, miles apart, even though certainly the score looked that way.
The one thing we know is that virtually every team in the playoff, and this is what's going to make it fascinating, has shown an ability to have at the very least a half or maybe even a game where they're just off, and you just never know what's going to happen. That's what makes it exciting. Adam, I know it's been a busy time. I appreciate you squeezing a couple of minutes to talk to us today.
You bet, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Adam Rittenberg, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Something happened to me yesterday that it led to kind of two uncomfortable conversations, but I need you guys I need your expertise again from young people's standpoint on what has led to this predicament. Can you do that for me?
Sure, I think I can do what I can for you.
Because you helped me out so much on knowing whether or not Creed is lame. I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself next. Fanta are going to join us coming up about 10 minutes from now. Appreciate Adam Rittenberg's time. Busy day. Pacers last night losing in Toronto. Indiana, we haven't gotten into that yet. There's a lot to talk about with IU basketball. Maybe we'll get into a little of that after we talk to John Fanta, including some stuff that came out yesterday regarding Mike Woodson, just the program itself. I do think there's validity to it. Some very kind of damning things I think that a lot of Indiana fans found eye-opening that we can get into. I wanted to present this to you guys because you guys are smarter than I when it comes to, the interwebs, right?
Cutting that now?
So I believe it was Monday night. There were a couple of guys that I know, nice guys, and they do a video podcast, right? And it's just two guys that do a podcast, and they just do it for fun, and they got a really nice studio set up. And they said, hey, would you be willing to come out? We like racing and just like talking sports, whatever else. Would you be interested in being a guest on our podcast? And I said, sure, no problem. So I drive out to this guy's house, Brad, nice guy, and he's got a very impressive studio set up in his garage that is basically set up like a bar, and he's in the real estate business, so his podcast is called Real Estate Makes Us Drink, and he and another guy in the business just get together and talk to different people about their line of work. So it's cool, right? So I get there, and he's got this very impressive studio set up. I'd never met him before, and he says, oh, behind you while we're talking will be a slideshow. I went and found a bunch of pictures just of you, off the internet and stuff, of different people that you know or events that you've covered and whatever. And I said, okay, cool. And so the slides are going while we're talking, and he goes, yeah, well, you can see behind you there's a picture of you and your wife. And I said, well, it's kind of a common law deal, but together for a very long time, but we're not technically married.
Did you correct him?
And, well, yeah, I said, well, we've been together for a very long time, but girlfriend, I guess, technically. And I look over my shoulder, and it's a picture of me and Emily Longnecker. Okay? And I said, oh, yeah, well, okay. And I said, yeah, well, Longnecker and I are very good friends. We're the exact same, age, and she's been a dear friend for 20 years, and she and Shannon are very good friends as well, and whatever else. And I said, oh, yeah, no, that's not my wife. And he goes, oh, well, I just Googled Jake Query wife, and that's what came up. So then I got curious, and I Googled. Now, Eddie, can you do me a favor? Can you Google for me Jake Query wife? Because I said, wait, what? And so he told me this, and I didn't Google myself. I'm not, even though that seems to be a common theme amongst people on this day part, I don't necessarily always do that. But I did do it yesterday. Now, did you just do it, Eddie?
I did.
And what comes up under images?
Oh, images? Let's go there.
Dangerous game.
Jake Query and Terry Stacy.
No, hold on. So is it different for you? Because
yes.
When I did it yesterday, I Googled Jake Query wife, and the first three pictures that came up are the three pictures of Emily Longnecker and I that exist like on social media. And I'm like, wait. So my question is, what is the algorithm that creates it?
It appears to be, for the first image that showed up for me, 3 pictures of Emily Longnecker and 3 pictures of Shannon. Is the makeup of the 6
photos. The first 2 right there are me and Emily Longnecker, right?
Yes, it's different for me.
So the question is, what is the algorithm that creates it where it automatically thinks and assumes that a picture – Emily was at my 50th birthday party, and I took a picture of the two of us, and then we did a celebrity cook-off thing together. We were the 2 non-celebrities there, but we did the Benihana thing several years ago and took a picture there because we're very good friends, right? And somehow or another, those are the first images that come up. So what is the algorithm where that got plugged in as my wife?
I'm not sure.
So then I had to go to Shannon and say, by the way, and so Shannon Googles Jake Query wife and immediately sees pictures of me and Emily Longnecker. So now all of a sudden, now Shannon was like totally laughed about it because she's friends with Emily also and was like, wait, what?
So
come here and validate this. I do not see Emily Longnecker within the first 3.
What are you on? That looks like Bing.
No. Oh, yeah. That could be different.
There you go. That's your issue.
That could be different.
So nobody uses Bing. That's not Eddie's fault, though. That's just how the programs are wired. Well, there's only one way to eventually solve that, Jake. The big headline of Jake Query married, and then that takes care of all that. Because the front page of the Star.
Shannon is the 4th one.
Yeah, well, like the 4th, right?
Yeah.
So there are 3 different photos of Emily and I. Like, what's going on here?
Shannon is 4, 5, and 6.
Now, here's the thing. Do you think Emily is rigging this? Do you think that's what it is?
I don't know Emily. Is she capable of such?
Emily's probably like me in the fact that I don't think of Emily as necessarily being like some. I mean, I can find I totally understand why it would be flattering for anybody to be linked with this sort of greatness, right?
Now there's a couple pictures of you and Derek.
Oh, hey now.
Wait a minute.
Page 2.
Not even.
No, front page?
Yeah.
Isn't that like
Yeah,
what in the world?
if you show more images on the search there. There you guys. Because the algorithm at that point is looking for keywords, and so I would assume because wife isn't used a ton.
Probably Derek and I had a conversation about his wife, and that came up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's probably an episode of a Derek and I thing where it's like Jake and Derek discuss his wife, and it probably goes to that.
Or
But
it just looks for other searches with you.
So if somebody Googled this, that they would, and I mean, Emily's a very pretty girl, right? But I mean, wouldn't they just naturally assume that, oh, I didn't know that. Jake's married to the girl from Channel 13.
If that was the search and those were the results, then yes, probably.
Now, the other thing is, do you think Shannon finds any of this at all, like, I don't know, like, she doesn't, at least outwardly, she kind of laughs about it. Now, is there any reason for her to be upset about this?
I do not know Shannon personally. I've only talked to her over the radio phone call that we had a couple of weeks ago, but given the trajectory of both of you at this stage of your life, I would imagine she doesn't care.
Now, what happens here if I Google Emily Longnecker husband?
Ooh, that would be funny. If it goes the other way and it's you, then we got a real story there.
No, it's stories that she's done covering marriages.
All right.
Covering weddings.
I think it's just a coincidence on the search.
I don't think Shannon cares.
Shannon's probably relieved.
She's probably like, I don't want to be.
Wait a minute. Emily Longnecker husband. There's the same picture of Emily and I at the 50th birthday
Guys, we got
party.
this all wrong. This is my fault. I apologize. If we wanted to know how Shannon felt, we should ask JMV.
That's a very good point. Google that. If you're curious what Shannon looks like, Google JMV girlfriend. No, obviously that's not the case. We know the situation with JMV, and he's very happy.
Right.
Else. But I do think that Shannon.
That was an older gag for those of you that have been along with the company ride for a while.
Shannon is always asking for us to, you should call John and see if he wants to go to that Indiana State game with us. Okay. He's very fun. Did you get hold of John Fanta?
I did.
All right, he's going to join us next. You know what that sound means? It is time for what I believe to be the favorite guest of the program. Talking college basketball, you can see his work, read his work, hear his work with Fox Sports. Also on the X Twitter post, John Fanta routinely has very entertaining videos, in particular with the pain and angst that comes with being a diehard, born and raised Cleveland fan and supporter. But he joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. John, first off, man, happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays to you guys. I didn't know that it was okay or legal for you guys to play that song coming out of a break, but I really appreciate you playing Cleveland rocks, because Cleveland does rock. The Cavs are rocking, the Guardians rocked, and the Browns have been rocked.
It actually is illegal for us to play that, but we're sending the bill to you. Is that all right?
Send it to Indiana's NIL fund.
Yeah, no kidding, man. So let's get to that, okay? Let's start with that, John. I think that when you have a team that, and we talked to you just before the year began, and I know that you were very high on the individualized talent that Indiana has. Now, whether or not they're going to be able to mesh that together into an actual team, and I don't mean that flippantly, but you know, seriously, is a different story. NIL is interesting, John, because the way that Indiana has done it, for example, is I think that if it doesn't perform well for you early, people are going to come out with a resentment of you just went out and got a team that you can buy. Is that an unfair criticism of Indiana to this point?
Well, no. Look, it's not an unfair criticism, especially when the team that you went out and paid for, look, it comes down to money to a degree. We'll get to what I mean by to a degree in a second. But when you spend $5 million or so on these players, and then you get humiliated by Louisville, a Louisville team who's been humiliated by Tennessee and Ole Miss. The SEC's been the best conference in college basketball. It's not even remotely close right now. But you can't get embarrassed. You cannot get embarrassed in an MTE on a neutral floor. You're Indiana basketball. And that performance, that was really embarrassing, guys. On the day before Thanksgiving, a lot of people are watching that game. Not a lot of people are working the day before Thanksgiving. That was a national game that stood in its own window, and Indiana got humiliated. Yet again, this team is playing a way that I don't think is very conducive to winning in 2024-25 college basketball. And I did think, visiting with the Hoosiers in the preseason, that there was a good mentality, that there was good body language. They went to Knoxville, played an exhibition, played pretty well. We're learning that preseason exhibitions really don't mean anything in college basketball. But I don't like at all what I saw last week. And there's some other signs that I don't love either. And here's what I mean by to a degree. Players are getting paid. But what I'm noticing is, regardless of what you're getting paid, you still have to have a locker room leader. You still have to have a culture and a climate and a coach and all of those things that are connected within a program. The best programs in this sport know who they are, regardless of what they're paying. And there are some programs at the top of college basketball that are not paying top dollar for their players, but they know who they are. Money can't buy you everything, and it can't buy you total happiness in college basketball if you still don't have the nuts and bolts of what it takes to win as a program. And it doesn't feel like Indiana really knows who they are at this point. And at times, I have been questioning the effort level. We should never be questioning the effort level, especially this early in the season. Something's got to change, and fast, because the Big Ten is a league that's loaded with 10-plus NCAA tournament caliber teams.
John, don't you run the risk, and I don't mean to sit here and just pile this on with Indiana, but I'm going to use that as the example for the obvious reason, but don't you run the risk with NIL? I'm not saying every year, but that you could have years where you go out and you get what seem to be players who have the skill set to fill a void for you, but maybe you even overpay for it. Now you create not only a resentment within perhaps a locker room that maybe can be overcome, but you have guys that are more concerned about the name on the check than the name on the jersey, and now all of a sudden you've lost your way. It feels to me like Indiana's teetering on that.
Well, or you're only concerned about the name on the check, and you don't really have any reason to be concerned about the name on the jersey. But that's where I go back to, you've got to double down on your principles. You've got to double down on who you are as a program. You're Indiana. As much as you're recruiting them, if you've got the right leadership and the right program, the players should be recruiting you. That's supposed to be Indiana basketball. It's a big enough brand that it should be recruiting itself. And it does. But we need to see, and soon, I'm not ready to give up on the season. Any Hoosier fan out there wants to give up on the season, come on. You know, an embarrassing effort does happen. It'll happen to other teams. I think tonight we could see a team or two get embarrassed that you didn't expect to. It's basketball. It happens. But for me, it's one of those things where with NIL, you can swing and miss. You can swing and miss on teams. Eric Musselman did last year. And Arkansas fans, I felt, overreacted, got ticked off at him. He took Arkansas to 3 straight Sweet 16s, right? And he took them to an Elite Eight. He had them, right down a win away from a Final Four. They hadn't done that since Nolan Richardson. They had been dormant for years. He swings and misses last year, and everybody reacts, and now he's the coach at USC. You're going to have some years where you swing and miss. I don't think Indiana swung and missed on their talent. I just think we're seeing similar trends to what we've seen before with this program of, what is it with them with perimeter shot making? Last night, Luke Goody hits 5 threes. It came against Sam Houston. It feels like if it's not Luke Goody, if it's not Mbako, then who is it from the perimeter? In a game where in a day and age, 3-point shooting is so much. It's 70% of this game now. I just feel like that's where you're not swinging and missing. You're almost playing the wrong way and hurting yourself.
John, is that Indiana not going out and getting the right ingredients, or is that Indiana not figuring out how to turn those ingredients into the scheme that you need to be able to get guys looks and spread around three-pointers around the perimeter from various areas?
It's partially both. But I do think the latter, the way that they're playing with Renew and Ballo, it just feels like that part of it is how they're playing in these games. And I don't know. It's hard to know if there could be more shooting opportunities for this team. Miles Rice can make perimeter shots. And honestly, he's the best thing this team has going for it because he's a guard who can be in control of a game. And Mbako is a future pro. There's a couple of pros on this roster. I think Bryson Tucker will end up being a pro. But I do think the scheme, I'm just not noticing, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not noticing a major shift in the way Indiana's playing, and I felt this team could play differently. And that's why the latter of your question is the reason why I answered it that way.
I agree with that.
And John, that's my bigger problem. I get that there's some complaints about NIL and how it's affecting certain programs, but I also see it work in places where it surprises me that it works. And at the end of the day, you're right. It's December 4th, and Indiana fans shouldn't lose faith. But to your question about why does it look the way that it does, it's year 4, and it's year 4 of Mike Woodson. And every season, it feels like the same problems of lack of three-point shooting, just dribble, drive, and hope for the best, incoherent nature on offense, and at questions of the effort at times. It feels like rinse and repeat with Mike Woodson. And to be clear, if they miss the tournament this year, I think he's gone. I don't think that Indiana will tolerate back-to-back years and 3 years in his tenure of missing the dance. When you look at it nationally, I think they have good players on the roster, and I think it is more so the latter of Jake's point, which is the guy pulling the strings.
Right now, if you put Indiana and Butler on a neutral floor, it would be a pick 'em for the spread. Maybe one team's favored by a point or two. Shouldn't be that way in 2024. I'm just being real with Indiana fans. Butler doesn't even have half of your NIL funds, but they're really well coached, and they play together, and they are now a Big East dark horse. They are. After last week beating Mississippi State, I don't think people nationally understand how good Mississippi State is. You will learn tonight Mississippi State will beat Pittsburgh down in Starkville, and it will be a very good win for Chris Jans, and that will only help Butler's win over Mississippi State. But Butler, this is not a team that's loaded with money, but they kept some key players who have bought into what Thad Matta's putting down. I don't sense the buy-in right now from Mike Woodson to his players. At some point, too, I agree with you guys. If Mike Woodson, if he doesn't make the tournament this year, you have to make a change in leadership. And I think Mike Woodson would tell you that. He might deny it at first, but there's a standard here. If he makes the tournament, and loses a first-round game, well, then maybe you have to reevaluate some things there too, and maybe you do make a change, or maybe you do say this is the last stand. Only the people that are inside the room know what's going to happen there. But there's too many signs here for a program that's too proud to look at things and say that it should be status quo at Indiana. Players also have to perform. Make no mistake about it. If I'm a player, and I'm not saying that I am, you got your butt kicked last week in the Bahamas. You beat a Providence team that was missing Bryce Hopkins. You should beat them. And you got humiliated. You got to be better than that. You guys saw the scene in the huddle where Luke Goody's talking with his teammates.
Yep, talked about it on the air. Yep.
You know why Luke Goody's talking to him that way? Because he comes from Brad Underwood, who went to the Elite Eight, and he knows what winning looks like. And that was his way of saying, hey, guys, and I can tell you this because Luke and I talked about it. He's like, hey, Brad Underwood wasn't perfect. He gave his players the keys too. Mike Woodson has to do some different things, but he does give his players the keys to the car.
John,
it doesn't feel like the players are driving it, which means then the coach has to adjust and take the keys himself and run the car. It's on him. It's his job to do so.
And it feels to me like Indiana right now just has too many chefs in the kitchen. And I don't mean from a roster standpoint. I mean from a coaching standpoint. Who's the one that is coming up with advances? Who's the one that is truly getting to know recruits? Who's the one that oversees things? It feels like there's just all these floating pieces out there, and Mike Woodson is just kind of the figurehead because he was the 80 Big Ten Player of the Year and a wonderful player at Indiana, don't get me wrong. But with that, I don't want to be hypercritical here. Well, I guess I am being. It just feels directionless to me. If the guys are given the keys, it's like somebody took their phone and the road atlas from them, and everybody's going in different directions.
This goes back to the original point on the very first thing we talked about. Do they know who they are? If we ask people in the building, what is your program based on? How do you play? How do you want to play? Who are your best 2 or 3 players? We don't have that opportunity, but it feels like today we be getting 4 or 5 different answers. That is problematic for your prospects of having a great season.
John Fanta is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, covers college hoops for Fox Sports. John, you alluded to Butler there. I felt like they were going to be a tournament team last year. In February, they get a win at home over Providence, and it's like, okay, there's enough momentum the rest of the way where they're going to get there. They don't. They wind up being a part of the NIT, and then you look at you mentioned retaining key players and what they were able to do to survive in this wild, wild west of the transfer portal, and you also highlighted their win over Feast Week. I know I'm asking you to map out a lot, and the Big East is as good as it gets, but is this finally the year Butler ends their Sure, but I mean just going in the preseason very early in the year, you would hope that pedigree is still there. For Butler, is this finally the stretch where they end their 6-year tournament drought? I know I'm asking you to map out a lot there.
If they beat Wisconsin on December 14th, we could start to talk about it. And I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you're fine.
I think my point is the Big East has gotten off to a rough start. Now, last night was big. Villanova takes down Cincinnati. And the common person out there might say, John, Villanova's not going to the tournament. No, they're not. But it's about when Butler plays Villanova, does the game mean anything for Butler's resume? Can it help them? / if they ever lost a game at Villanova, does it kill them? As of this morning, Villanova's right around the top 15 KenPom, and they're a 5-4 club. That's a good thing for your league. And right now, if you look at the ACC has 10 teams outside the top 100 of the net. 10! That's unbelievable. That means there's a double-digit number of games that really don't benefit you as an ACC team. So for me, for Butler, huge to take the Arizona tip-off. That washes out the stain of the loss to Austin Peay. Now you've got at Houston this weekend. It's a house money game. Nobody expects Butler to win. If Butler's in the game, that honestly would be a good thing for them. There's not many teams going down to Houston and beating Houston on their home court. It's a house money game. Butler has nothing to lose. Can they be in the game? Yes. Because why? They are a really good shot-making team, fellas. This team drills threes. Jameel Telfort and Pierre Brooks are playing at a very high level. Patrick McCaffrey has added maturity and experience, Big Ten maturity to this team. Andre Screen has gotten better. Kobe King does some good things. Finley Bizjack does some good things. What's the pathway for them in the Big East? Well, you got to get a double-digit number of conference wins. You got to finish in the top 5 of this league. So 4 or 5 or 6. Even 6 is okay depending on what your wins are. You'd really like to get Marquette one time. You'd like to beat them once. You'd like to beat St. John's once, who's going to have really good metrics, I feel. If you do those things and you avoid a loss to Seton Hall, whose metrics are bad. Notice, fellas, I didn't say avoid a loss to DePaul. Why? DePaul no longer stinks. They are out of the basement, and they are at least a decent team. Last year, that team was sub 300 in America. They no longer are that. They're a top 70-ish team. Avoid the loss to Seton Hall. Beat a couple of the top teams. Just avoid some massive losing streak. And if you ever beat Wisconsin on December 14th, Butler versus Wisconsin, it's at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Purdue, Texas A&M, I believe, is the other game in that doubleheader. That's a huge college hoops doubleheader in downtown Indianapolis. Gives you a little bit of a Crossroads Classic vibe. For Butler, if they could beat Wisconsin that day, I'll come on your show the following week, and we're talking tournament.
All right, John,
Let's go.
We're going to hold you to that, and I'm going to wrap with this with you. I want you to tell me if you agree with this statement. To me, it's almost criminal, and I'm guilty of it, in Central Indiana that we harp so much on talking Indiana and their futility and Mike Woodson and their question mark and Indiana's lack of understanding its identity when we should be praising the fact that, in my opinion, a program that does that as well as anybody in college basketball, and right now I think would have to be considered a top 5 or 10 in understanding who they are, being loyal to it, trusting it, pushing in on it, and finding success with never wavering from it, is Matt Painter's Purdue Group. And what they do from one year to the next to me is as impressive as anybody in college basketball. Your thoughts?
On this day, I put them at number 1 in knowing who they are. Number 1 over everybody else. Because to lose Zach Edey, and all of us on the outside are saying, how are they ever going to replace him? What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? Painter could not have been calmer. He lost his freshman, Daniel Jacobson, to an injury in the first week of the season. He doesn't panic. He doesn't lose it. Trey Kaufman-Renn, Painter said he would be terrific. What's great about Painter is, guys, he doesn't BS. Like, he just tells you what he thinks, what he knows, and not in a cocky way, in a very humble way, and he's right. This team, it plays so hard for him. Miles Colvin's taking the next step. That's a big leap. It's a big storyline. Braden Smith is as good as any guard in America. Fletcher Lawyer knows who he is. You're absolutely right. The Purdue Boilermakers are number 1 in the column of having great program cohesiveness and terrific program identity. They should be celebrated, because to think they could win a 3rd consecutive Big Ten regular season title when you lost an all-time player in Zach Edey, the first repeat National Player of the Year since Ralph Sampson, is absolutely unbelievable.
John, we'll talk to you in 11 days after the Bulldogs knock off Wisconsin, all right?
Thank you, guys. Happy holidays.
All right, same to you. John Fanta, our friend on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Gas line. Awesome stuff always.
He's the best.
Really good. In terms of knowing who you are, it seems like there is an identity crisis in the state of Indiana. It does. It seems like right now there's a team in Indiana with an identity crisis of knowing who they are. And maybe coming into the year resting on their laurels, and maybe coming in thinking that the name itself was going to allow them to just kind of cruise in continuation of what has been placed before them based on some accomplishment and expectation. And big money. Maybe big money was a factor in a guy getting a big check and then suddenly the game changes a little bit. And that's a discussion that I think we need to have in figuring out the identity. And I'm not talking about Mike Woodson's group, but rather the one that Dustin Dopirak covers, and that's why he's going to join us next. I love this song, Eddie.
Same.
Love it. There's just something about, I will give credit to this song because it just totally typifies the feel of walking the streets of New York. And there's no place like New York City, I will tell you that. Apologies to Dorothy. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, Pacers in action. Is it tonight or tomorrow night, Eddie, taking on Brooklyn?
Tonight.
Wait, why is it tonight, though?
The Sega Baba.
All right.
No, nobody says that.
Nobody says Brooklyn either.
From the Indianapolis. No, that's not true because the guy
Yes, that is true.
When I took a tour of Brooklyn, the guy that was giving me the tour of Brooklyn called it that, and that's why I've always called it because he's the host.
Maybe
right?
he just had peanut butter.
I'm just telling you. Our friend from the Indy Stars, Dustin
Dopirak.
And I'll just ask him right now, Dustin, how often do you ever hear the phrase Sega Baba?
I feel like it's a few times by particular NBA stats nerds. Like there are people that are into it.
Did you use? Let me ask you. Did you use the word nerds right there?
I did. Yes.
Okay,
I
thank
did.
you.
Yeah.
See,
okay.
so basically,
I'm a nerd too, but I mean,
so what? Okay,
You're
here's
the only
thing.
one that's offended by that term in this room, Jake.
Dustin, you and I have met each other on a very limited occasion. We've been in proximity of one another. But I, at least to you, I exude cool, correct? Would you agree with that?
Obviously. Clearly, Jake. You are a man of refined intelligence.
Right. Okay. And so with that, you would not list me as a nerd. Would that be correct?
Sure.
Okay. So it's okay for me to say that anybody that says Sega Baba is, in fact, a nerd, even though you threw that out and not me, right?
I guess you can. I mean, you can go there if that's how you're trying to play this long.
I'm not trying to be Ogre from Revenge of the Nerds. I mean, don't get me wrong, but all right. So let's begin with this. The reality is, I do know that when you are playing on back-to-back nights, fatigue can be a factor. Last night after that game, and Dustin, I want you to tell me if you noticed this, and I'm just going off of the audio, but Tyrese Halliburton sounded emotionally fatigued. He sounded like a guy that was like, look, this is embarrassing, and almost like he was at his wit's end of trying to figure out why they have been so putrid, in particular on the road. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think. I watched the YouTube video, and you can see it in there. That there's just a feeling of okay, like there's something deeply wrong with us, and we need to fix it right now. I think fatigue to the point of feeling like broken, like there's nothing I can figure out. I wouldn't go that far. I did sense some level of sort of determination there, but like a sense of like, all right, like basically this has been allowed to go on for too long. If we've sort of allowed ourselves for, obviously, speaking from his perspective, they've allowed themselves to take this too far. They've allowed themselves to like let too many things go, and it's about to get bad if they don't get it right. And that is where they are. Basically, they have a whole stretch of winnable games here before they go on the road to Phoenix. For a little West Coast road trip there, it's going to be tough when they get Phoenix. Sacramento and Golden State. They got Brooklyn, who's going to be down several people, including Cam Thomas tonight. They've got a beatable Chicago team on Friday. They come back for obviously a beatable Charlotte team. But it's like you've left too many winnable games on the table there. You just got beat by a Toronto team that's now 7-15 after having beaten you. And there's just an obvious sense that they're not doing. There's a whole lot of things they're doing that they should be doing, and the list of what's wrong with this team right now is longer than the list of what's right. So they're fatigued to some degree, but I did at least catch some level of sort of quiet determination, and I guess you could give it to him that like at least he's playing better. He obviously had been brutal up until last week. And so you're finally starting to see some juice in his step and the ability to make some shots. He at least he's playing remotely like Tyrese Halliburton now. So I think you see at least some level within that of we can do this, we can fix this, but not the way that they're operating.
Is there a level of now, to your point about Tyrese Halliburton, consistency building that we can start to dust off the conversation and outlook we had about him as an all-star caliber player a year ago? I was never in that boat, but the chatter was, is he really still hurt? And they're just not, it's not to the point that it needs to be publicly aware. Is it the long off season? And I know he's going to have to stack them on the road, but you look at the last 5 games, that's looked more like the Tyrese Halliburton we were accustomed to a season ago. Are we at that point now clearly, or do you still need to see more from him over the next month?
There's several questions tied within that. I would say, obviously he didn't have a good, particularly good game against Memphis on Sunday. I think like as far as injury is concerned, I mean, like just to address, I mean, like there's obviously a back issue, and I don't know that there was any trauma that caused it, and so therefore I don't know that it's something that necessarily goes away either, because like I don't think it's like he took a shot at some point. I mean, he's been wearing that back brace kind of heat pad thing, on the bench. He's still going to do that. Like I don't think that's going to change.
Dustin,
to
ask a specific about that, and I'm sorry to cut across you, but
Sure,
I
yeah,
want you to elaborate on the full answer. But when you say that's not something that's going to get fixed, and I'm not asking you to be a doctor, but just from what you've seen,
right.
Are you saying this season, or that's just him now moving forward forever?
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I really don't know. I mean, basically, obviously he has had spasms. There's a lot of guys who just have it lock up on them every once in a while. So like, I don't have his medical records, and he's being very quiet about talking about that. I'm just acknowledging that's a thing,
sure.
And like, I don't know. I mean, he's been wearing that thing for a while. Like, it's not like, this has just been the last couple of weeks. I mean, I've seen that pad on him, throughout various points of last year. And like I said, I mean, there was at least, I think games where he was either on the injury report or missed one because he was having back spasms. So, I think there's something to just how he's built in terms of like what that leads to. But I don't know if you go so far as to use the term chronic or not. But obviously, again, it hasn't been on the injury report, but it's obviously a thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I can't say that thing's gone. I don't have nearly to your point, the expertise or the, medical records to be able to tell you, okay, that's going to go away or it's not going to go away. But I'm not going to say I don't know when I would have to.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to speculate on that. That's fine.
Yeah, I couldn't even guess. But I mean, I do think that he just needed to see a few go in. I do think the message got through from Pascal. I mean, I thought that was really interesting at the end of, I think it was the Wizards game where, Halliburton was just walking the bench and like Siakam just stopped him and said, look, you've got to stop putting so much pressure on every shot that goes in or down. Just play hard, be yourself, be free. You've done the work. Like, it's going to go in at some point. Like, they're not all going to go in. Some are, some aren't, but you got to just play. And I do think he had to go through kind of a mental thing there because I think he did put a lot of pressure on himself. I think he did believe like, okay, like I'm the all-star caliber player. Like I have to make these shots. I do make these shots. Why aren't these shots going in? And he said some things like, I've got to just work through this, but I do think it was really weighing on him. But I do think there's been some level of at least mental breakthrough about being able to, move on from these moments and not feel like that's the whole of his offensive production, and that's not the whole of him as a player. So I think he's just shot it with more confidence, and he's just operating with more confidence. So I think he's going to be better. I mean, I don't know. He's from a statistic standpoint, like he's got to do a lot to get back in All-Star conversation. I mean, right now, if you had a vote right now, you wouldn't vote for him just because it's not that just what he did in the first 20 games drags things down enough. But you might see him start to grow into that, and he looked that way mostly last night. I thought he also played downhill. It wasn't just making threes; it was looking for more opportunities to drive, and a lot of that's based on how you're being defended. I mean, I think Memphis does a really good job of clogging the lane, and there was a reason why 9 out of the 10 field goal attempts he had were threes. And last night you saw a more of a focus on getting to the rim and driving past people, but there was also the ability to do that. I mean, there was more than a few occasions he was in an isolation situation on a switch, and when he blew by somebody, there was nobody at the rim to stop him. So that doesn't happen against Memphis. But it does seem like his mentality is more there. Again, like there might be some bad nights, coming up. You don't know. And we'll see what it looks like against Brooklyn tonight, on the second night of a back-to-back and Chicago on Friday. But I do think he's probably through the worst of it, I guess is the best way to put it, just because I think mentally he's in a better place as far as how his individual game goes. And that might lead to him being a better leader for this group as a whole.
Dustin, last night I thought Obi Toppin gave a real burst for the Pacers. I think he played a total of 14 minutes. Why in the world was he not in there longer?
Honestly, well, somebody asked me this last night because his best play, basically, like first half, he played 4 minutes. He had 2 fouls. So, like, basically, he had a long stretch. I think basically his great play was like 10 minutes straight. I guess you could have brought him back in down the stretch to get some more there. But he played like a pretty significantly long segment when he was playing really well. And they kind of, I think, rode him as long as they could. And they probably should have taken an opportunity to get him back in. But, basically it wasn't like he had a great first half and a great second half. And why didn't he play longer? Like, he didn't have a particular first great segment. He had 2 fouls in 4 minutes. So they were like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. We got to get him out of there. And when he was playing well, they left him in, for a pretty extended segment. So I get that. I'm going to get the argument, but it was like it's not like, oh, he was playing, as well in both halves, and why didn't he get a full first half? He didn't play particularly well in the first half. He played really well in the second.
And Jarris Walker is one that I'm broken record here, Dustin. I realize.
Mm-hmm.
I like him. We had him on the show. He was really likable. There are times where when he plays, you can see it. You can see the flashes. Yeah. But I also feel like at some point, you've got to quit leaning in to try to get it uncorked. Am I being too critical?
I mean, right now you don't have a choice but to lean into getting uncorked because, who's the other option? While Shepard and Neesmith are out, you have to give them minutes. It's not like there's somebody else you can bring in and say, obviously you can do things like give Quentin Jackson minutes, but at a certain point, he has to play because there's just not enough bodies. Basically, he has to have, this is his chance. But to your point, he's not making the most of it. I think obviously a lot of people went in and said, okay, well, is this the year he gets minutes? And basically when they had 11, in the road, or 11 guys that you were looking at, I guess 12 if you were counting Wiseman, you're like, okay, well, is he technically going to be the outside guy looking in? Because you're looking at Shepard and Mathurin as your second team wings, Obi at the 4, where and obviously the starters were who they were with Nembhard, Neesmith, and Siakam all back. So like, okay, where's the minutes for Jarris Walker? Don't you have to give your lottery pick a chance? And because of the injuries, he's got that chance. And, there have been a handful of games where you said, well, it's okay, that's what it's supposed to look like. But as a whole, it really hasn't been there. You've seen some games where he's flat out disappeared. You don't have a chance but to keep leaning in and keep trying to get the most out of this. But, if you get Neesmith and Shepard back and they're the same players they were, he's going to lose out on opportunity real fast because, you can rely on those guys more, basically. And you haven't shown an ability to really rely on him. Again, I think the biggest thing is, you're not seeing him learn to really wall up as a defensive player. He's had a couple moments where he has. I thought he had a good night. I think it was against Detroit. He had a pretty good night against Cade Cunningham. But other than that, I think there's maybe one or two games in there that were pretty good. You see his ability to he's a really good ball thief. Basically, he's really good at just getting in there and poking the ball out. But you need to be able to trust him on a star player for 20, 25 minutes a night. That's his long-term. If he's going to be the player that you drafted, that's what you need. He's got to be able to defend multiple guys, and you've got to be able to take top guards or top forwards and do it for 20, 25 minutes, maybe even 30. And basically, you're not seeing that because he still defends with his hands too much, and you see him just not look as quick as you want him to look. And offensively, he's got some good pieces to his game, but he's not. He doesn't look like a dominant offensive player. He's hitting open threes, passes the ball nice, but he's not exerting will as kind of a dribble drive guy and kind of. Bullying somebody down, taking somebody down in a post up and bullying them to a bucket. You're not seeing that. And, that's the thing that you would want to see if you're trying to really rely on that guy as a major piece. So, yeah, yes, the answer is true in the long term, but there's still going to be a while where he's going to get these opportunities because, as Rick Carlisle said on Sunday, Neesmith and Shepard are still weeks away.
Jimmy, do you know what the quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals and the site of tonight's Pacers game have in common?
Give it to me, Jake.
Both are a borough. As the Pacers going to be in Brooklyn tonight, and our friend from the Indianapolis Star, Dustin
Dopirak,
will have all of the coverage for you at IndyStar.com.
You're right. That exuded cool and swag, that joke, that pun there by you. You're right.
I told you.
We were wrong. That's our bad.
Listen.
Intellectual refinement right there, Jake. That's what that was.
I'm not going to lie to you, fellas. It takes over a half century for this kind of sexiness to ferment and finally show itself. But here it is. Here it is, baby. Dustin, I appreciate it. We'll be watching the coverage, all right?
Thanks as always, guys.
All right, that's Dustin
Dopirak
on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line.
You look beside yourself over there, Eddie.
Oh, yeah.
Are you just drinking it all in?
Dustin just stroked the ego of Jake, and now he's going to be riding a high for the next hour and 15 minutes.
No, listen. My ego, admittedly, was a little bit based on the fact that, I had, it appears as though multiple women fighting over who's the wife. I think Emily's doctoring the Google search. I do. I think that's the algorithm, right?
I would love that to be an inside job of some kind. That would be great. Yes, for sure.
By the way, Zach Keefer going to join us mercifully in 15. So I'll go ahead and take the bait and comment on it. Zach Keefer going to join us just a couple minutes, by the way. On the X-Post Twitter, there's a post that has gone, I guess somewhat viral because everybody's responding to it, from Albert Breer, who is an NFL reporter, of course, been around a long time writer. And he is commenting off of a screen grab on the get-in prices for the Big Ten title game at just $12. And he says, this is another reason why the Big Ten title game should be in Chicago. It's a massive alumni base for the majority of Big Ten schools, like Atlanta is for the SEC. If you have it in Chicago, you take the travel element out of it for a lot of fans. I don't know if Albert's aware of the fact, I looked it up, by the way, Chicago is 57 miles further a drive from State College, Pennsylvania, than is Indianapolis. And I don't know that there are a ton of fans from Oregon that would consider Chicago to be that much more a convenient drive and or flight than Indianapolis. There's a direct flight from Eugene to Indianapolis. But I will tell you, as a Clemson football fan, that for me, and when Clemson was at the level of, competing and going into the college football playoff of the four games, or the four teams, back when it was just the four teams, now you have even in addition to that. But for me, when Clemson was annually going into the ACC title game in Charlotte, and I would drive down to Clemson for home games, 3 or 4 times a year, right? And I went to the national championship game in Tampa when they took on Alabama and won it. It was never of consideration for me to go to the ACC championship game because I knew they were going to be playing in the college football playoff. And if there was the possibility they were going to play the national title game, I was like, man, you know what? Like, that's what I would rather go to. That inevitably has to be in play for both Oregon and Penn State fans. Fans of both schools, I would think it has nothing to do with where the game is being played and more so to do with if you are a fan of either school, you're saying to yourself, okay, I can either fly from Portland or Eugene or Seattle or Sacramento or wherever you live as an Oregon alum. I can fly to Indianapolis and go to this game, or I can just wait and go to the 2 and or 3 games that they're going to play in the college football playoff and try to watch them win a national championship. And probably the same is true for Penn State as well. That would not change at all if it was in Chicago, number one. And number two, in terms of your walk-up traffic in Chicago, yeah, obviously if it's Minnesota and Michigan, then Chicago probably has a compelling argument. But it's also going to be 22 degrees. And I know, listen, I don't have a problem with football outdoors and all that. That's kind of what the sport is meant to be. I get it. But for a lot of fans, they're like, yeah, I'm not going to drive that far and go to a game to sit outside. And where would it be if it was in Chicago? Soldier Field, right?
I mean, that's the only realistic place you could put it.
Right. So,
yeah, I'm sure the Big Ten wants the biggest game of their season being decided in Chicago in December.
Right. I mean, yeah, exactly. Like this was not a very well thought out argument here that's being made.
Yeah, I don't understand why. Like, I get the argument to maybe rotate it around to different sections of the country because of the Big Ten expansion.
And they've done that, right? I mean,
right. They've done it with basketball already. Like, it would make sense to do it for football at some point. But the idea of moving it 3 hours north in an outdoor venue that does not solve any travel issues, I'm not down for.
There is no doubt about the fact. I have always felt each region of this country has a regional hub. Atlanta is the regional hub of the Southeast. Dallas is the regional hub of the Southwest. Phoenix of the desert Southwest. Seattle of the Pacific Northwest, and Chicago of the Midwest. Minneapolis of the Plains, right? So, yeah, I get it. In terms of the traditional Big Ten area, Chicago is the epicenter of that. It is the capital of that region. But the Big Ten doesn't exist of that anymore. The Big Ten now is a national brand and a national landscape, so it is no longer geographically the center of the Big Ten region because you factor in Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Rutgers, Maryland. It's different times, man. Like 1985, that was a totally accurate tweet, except for Twitter didn't exist, so then it would have been difficult. Zach Keefer's next. question that I just looked up because my two options were looking up great trivia questions or chatting with you guys during the break.
You made probably a wise choice.
In the history of the Big Ten football championship game, which the first year was 2011, there is one game record. If you look at the statistical records held in the Big Ten championship game, there is one that belongs to a current member of the Indianapolis Colts. I could go so far as to say there's only one that belongs to any time member. I should have just said it that way. There is one record that belongs to somebody who became an Indianapolis Colt.
But did you give away the fact they still are?
I believe they still are. How's that? I believe they still are. Would you like to guess the member?
Your hesitancy on if they are still a Colt now throws me for a loop, and since the show's over at 3, I will say Jonathan Taylor, but I don't think Wisconsin was ever in the Big Ten title game.
We'll get Zach Keefer on the line from The Athletic, and I will ask him this fabulous trivia question that I just created. This is what we call a Jake Query brain drop that happens from time to time on this program.
Need an umbrella. Zach
Keefer, in the history of the Big Ten football championship game, the first time that this game was played was in 2011. In the history of the game, in terms of the statistical record book, there is one person who holds a record for the Big Ten title game that is a member of the Indianapolis Colts, and I am certain, when I say certain he's a member of the Colts, I mean he's on the active roster. I'm pretty sure. Do you know what player I'm talking about, Zach? And don't feel bad if you don't, because I would not have known this had I not just looked it up.
Yeah, it can't be Jonathan Taylor then. I want to say that first game was Michigan State, Wisconsin.
That is correct.
I was there. I couldn't tell you the player, though. Who is it?
The record for most rushing yards in a Big Ten title game is 331, which is held by Trey Sermon.
Oh, Trey Sermon.
Ohio State versus North.
331 by himself. That was the Ohio State game where they had to run up the score.
Ohio State against Northwestern in 2020, and they won that game. I think you're right, because weren't they like on the brink of not getting it? No, they won 22-10.
I'm thinking of the Urban Meyer year where they were trying to get into the playoff as the 4, so they beat Wisconsin by 50, and I think they ended up winning the whole thing that year in 14.
59-0 in 2014, correct.
There you go.
That was the year they lost. I think that was the year they lost to Virginia Tech to open the season, and then had to just every week make the case for themselves, right? But
yeah, Zeke Elliott. They did win the whole thing, though.
All right, Zeke, by the way, your soccer nickname, that much I know, Zach Keefer, who joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line from The Athletic. We'll begin with this. Before we get into the Colts, Zach, he's a guy that I know that you have followed around. You have done a lot of writing on, and that is that Andrew Luck has a new job. I don't know, around here, most people are probably aware of that. I saw that he is the general manager of Stanford football. Could you please explain how this came about and what that job entails?
Yeah, this is the third interview I've done in the last couple of days. Apparently when Andrew Luck makes news, people give me a call. So I guess I'm the Andrew Luck guy, which is a good thing or maybe not a great thing. General manager, he's in charge of the football program. He's the CEO in respect of the football program. He's in charge of the coaching staff. He's in charge of the way they handle NIL. He's in charge of the team's success. And look, Andrew loves Stanford. He met his wife as a freshman in the dorm rooms at that school, and she was a gymnast and he was a football player, and so that's a special place for them. That's where they're raising their daughters. This doesn't surprise me at all that he's back at Stanford, but I think it's a tall hill to climb. College football right now, we don't know what it's going to look like in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years. Is Stanford going to be able to be competitive with the academic standards that they have, with the NIL money that's being shelled out? I mean, Michigan just got a quarterback for $20 million. That's good money a couple of years ago in the NFL if you're a starting quarterback. So it feels like the wild, wild west right now in college football. I don't know if Stanford's going to be competitive, but his job is going to be all-encompassing. The coaches report to him. He's going to be in charge of, what they do in recruiting and how they do it and who they pay and how much they pay them. So it wouldn't surprise me if he has a lot of success at this role because he loves the school and he's one of the smartest people I've ever been around in the NFL, and that includes executives and coaches, if other schools start to follow suit. There's not a lot of Andrew Lucks out there. There's really only one. And by that, I mean universities go out and find a famous member of the football program, an alum, who can kind of do this role where it's a hybrid between football and really running the program from a non-coaching standpoint.
Zach, what do you measure that by then? Because I was going to ask you, is this a litmus test for other programs to maybe do this? Because it's really a first-of-its-kind position. Some people are worried if it's going to have a conflict between coach working with this kind of quasi-general manager. What would other schools need to see to say, oh, that worked, to think about doing something like this?
Yeah, where does the athletic director's job end? And where does the general manager's job start, right? The AD is obviously overseeing every athletic team at the school, and Stanford's really successful in a lot of them. I think they sent like 59 athletes and alums to the Olympics this summer. Like, that's insane. But really, this is football, right? Football matters the most. It's going to be the one that, you know, puts the money in the coffers where they can go out and spend and buy these players, which is really where we're at right now with college football. It's going to be interesting to figure out the coaching staff dynamic, because this coach, Andrew, was on the hiring committee for this coach. I mean, and this goes back to David Shaw, who struggled at the end of his tenure. They've won 3 games each of the past 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, this team was a power when Andrew Luck was there. Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw. I mean, they were going to BCS bowl games and winning by 30 points. They were going 12-1 and 13-1 and stuff like that. And they've won 9 games in 3 years. So Andrew Luck, he said this the other day on the Dan Patrick Show. He said, look, we need to win. Like, number one, we need to win. That's going to be the fascinating part, because he's going to have to fire coaches if they don't. And he's going to have to make decisions that a general manager in the NFL would make. So that's going to be the interesting part. But I think it's a necessary step for Stanford. Tap into one of your best alumni, right? He's probably the number 2 alumni they have behind John Elway in terms of, you know, visibility. And Andrew wanted the challenge.
You mean football-wise, right?
Yeah, football-wise. You know, like I mentioned, the Olympics. But, look, Andrew, you know, he admitted, like, he was walking around his house after he retired, and he was saying to himself, I'm 30 years old. I can't be retired. Like, this dude needed a challenge. And this is a challenge that is really unforeseen in college football. So I think it's gonna invigorate him.
Do you think he carries cachet to this day for young people? Like, do you think an 18-year-old, if he's choosing between Stanford and Washington and Notre Dame, and Andrew Luck walks in his house, goes, oh, wow, Andrew Luck? Or do you think he thinks, like, yeah, my dad told me that guy was a good player?
I think, Jake, that 18-year-old probably says, oh, that's the guy who retired early, right? Or that's the guy that I heard was really good, but I just think the retirement clouds so much of his career. Maybe it does in Indianapolis, and maybe I'm jaded because I covered so much of it, but I don't know. I don't know how 16 and 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds think these days. I don't think it matters as much as it probably would have used to.
Yeah, fair. You know, one of the things I think, you know, that Andrew Luck, I didn't hear it, but I know that he had commented that I think Andrew Luck has had a difficulty, Zach, as you know, internalizing and just battling with his relationship with the game of football in terms of his love for it, maybe even his resentment for it, his, you know, all of that, and whether or not he did leave early and his mindset with the game. And now this, you know, reinvigorates that, which takes us to this version of the Indianapolis Colts now today. They have a quarterback that I don't think that it's that Anthony Richardson was ever dealing with or battling with a love for the game, but rather just simply an understanding of the game. Has Richardson started to turn the corner, and has he done so because of untapping an area that truthfully was the area that got Andrew Luck into trouble, which was utilizing his body beyond his arm to open up his game?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, and I think so. I think what I'm seeing right now from Anthony Richardson is a flawed game, but it feels like he's turned the corner in this regard. The dude is making winning plays. And I know what you're going to say. I know what the detractors are going to say, like he throws too many interceptions, and he's not a polished product right now. He needs to play, but it's hard to win. And I know they've only beat the Jets and the Patriots, right? They're 2-1 since he came back from the benching, but it's hard to win. This is not a perfect roster, and he's making winning plays. And so I think you can live with that. I think, Jake, you would agree with me that this whole season is about where you are January, 12th, 15th? I don't know when the last game is. I don't know if this team makes the playoffs. Probably not unless they get really hot, but I just don't see it. So is the arrow pointing up at the end of the season? I think right now you'd say it's tilting up, because of what this team has been through and what he's been through and how he handled the benching. I mean, the benching wasn't so much about the tap out, and it wasn't so much about his play. It was about his preparation, right? I think they wanted to get his attention. And as strange as this is in NFL recent history in terms of if you bench the guy at quarterback, he doesn't come back, right? We have two examples this year, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, of those quarterbacks with all the talent in the world just, drafted, 20 months ago or whatever it is, coming back and playing well. So I think the arrow is tilting up. And for me, and I'm not breaking any news here, like everyone watching this team can tell, it's like the governor's off in terms of play calling. It's like Shane Steichen has been like, oh, I'm going to just start running him now.
Right.
Because that's his greatest asset. And he's been pretty good with the deep balls, he's been pretty good with passes. He's missed some, but it just seems like he's gone back to last year where he's like, let's use this guy as a weapon. And it runs counter to what Steichen said in the preseason. Somebody asked him and he said about protecting Richardson versus, letting him go and letting him run and letting him play like a linebacker. And he said, well, you don't want to take away the 3-point shot from Steph Curry. And it just didn't seem like he thought that way while he was calling games. Now the governor's off, and now you're seeing Richardson really tap into what he's best at. He's just raw physical ability, willing this team to victory. It wasn't pretty Sunday in Foxborough, but the kid made winning plays down the drive. That was a great throw to Pierce. He willed himself into the end zone. Great pull block from Quentin Nelson. I think you're starting to see him become who he can be because they've really just opened up the playbook and said, go do what you do best.
Zach, to me, the one area, and I'm going to say concern for lack of a better phrase, okay, the thing that I'm interested in is this. I think to get Anthony Richardson uncorked and to get him going, they realized, to your point, they had to take that governor bubble wrap off of him and say, we got to utilize his legs. And we got to utilize his legs to soften defenses, bring a defense up a little bit, and get the zones open where he can then start hitting the layups, okay?
Yeah.
But the problem is the fine line, and I want you to tell me if you agree with this, the fine line of then becoming too reliant on that and as a result starting to falsify, stunt his growth in terms of the passing game so that once the legs go away, you don't have that to then rely on.
Yeah, that's the fine line. But that's why the kid's got to play. That's why the kid has got to play. He's got to be in these situations. He's got to learn. Like, when does Patrick Mahomes run? For the most part, he's a pocket passer during the season. There's a couple times when he'll take off. He did a couple weeks ago. But he's admitted before that he really only unleashes his legs as a weapon in the playoffs when he has to. And so I still believe, and I think the Colts decision makers believe this, you have to win from the pocket in this league. To really win consistently, we're talking divisions and playoff games and Super Bowls, the quarterback has to win from the pocket. But you see what Josh Allen does every couple of weeks where he just dominates a play using his physical abilities and using his legs. So I think that's the fine line they're trying to figure out with Richardson. But again, he started 13 games, and he started 13 games in college. So Bo Nix is having a ton of success in Denver. He started like 30 games in college, so it's just a different world. Richardson needs to play to figure that out. But I think if you hold him back and turn him into a pocket passer, I think that goes back to what you just mentioned. That stunts his growth.
Zach Keefer is our guest of The Athletic. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Zach, we talk about the old cliche all the time about for a young team, how getting to the playoffs, regardless of what happens there, can really help the large-scale development. And while sometimes I shrug that off, for Anthony Richardson, when it's all about reps, and Jake and I talked about this yesterday, the lights being brightest in a playoff scenario, I think that's invaluable, and it's part of the reason why you hope the gravy you would get this year by starting him is maybe squeaking into the playoffs. Let's say they take care of business against Denver, however that comes, and they win out the rest of the way, and they earn that last playoff spot. Do you agree with that, whether it's sentiment or fact, that for a player like him to get that extra opportunity and it being a meaningful game could be super beneficial for him?
100%, Jimmy, 100%. This dude needs to play, and he needs to play in different situations, and he needs to play well. If they get to the playoffs, that means they're doing something right. That means Steichen's figuring something out. Whether, what we just talked about, how much to run him, how much to use that, how much to lean on his passing ability. And it also means the most important thing is that Richardson's figuring it out, right? They benched him, 10 games into his career, basically to send him a message. Like, you're not there. You're not preparing the right way. you're not leading this franchise necessarily in the right way. And I don't think it was because Richardson is a bad locker room guy. Never got that sense. It's just the preparation wasn't there. And so if they get to the playoffs and they squeak in the 6th or the 7th seed, I think that means the light has come on to some degree, and that he's gotten them to the place where they're playing really, really meaningful games. That's everything. That's everything for young quarterbacks, because they keep hearing the process. When the process starts to pay them back, that's when they can start to play confidently and freely. And if you're playing to win and playing not to lose, it's two very different things, especially at the quarterback position. Guys have said that over the years. That's so instrumental to that position. And I think if they're able to get in there, like, that is absolutely best case scenario for this team where they sit right now. And I think that means a whole different thing for 2025 in terms of optimism, belief, and the way you approach the offseason. Because if you have the quarterback in place, that frees you up to do all kinds of things. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do them, because we know the general manager can be a little bit hesitant in that regard. But I think that's absolutely best case scenario for this team right now.
Zach Keefer from The Athletic is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Of course, he was for years primarily a Colts writer, now writing national profiles for The Athletic. That includes a lot around the NFL. So, Zach, I want to revisit something that you and I have talked about before, but you've done even more so going around to different areas. And I want to know this. After having been almost primarily and esoterically a Colts writer, and now going and covering athletes with different franchises of different sports, do you find that franchises all by and large are pretty much by target run the same way, or are there areas that it was illuminated to you that Indianapolis runs differently?
Yeah, they're all different. And then I really got a sense of that in training camps when I would travel around the country and go to 3 or 4 in a week, or 5 or 6 in 2 weeks. I mean, I go to Southern California, and I'm there at Cowboys training camp, and it's like a flea market. It's like a circus. And this is a small thing, and maybe it just stands out to me, but it might be interesting to some listeners. Like, they've got 40 different apparel shops before you get to the field, and fans are taking videos of every single play the entire training camp. That's not allowed with a lot of places. And the media is allowed to take video of every single play. That's not allowed in almost every single place. So that hit me, and I think it starts with ownership. I think there's so many. You can hear my dog getting excited about this conversation.
Now, what's the doggy's name? What's the doggy's name, Zach?
Sam.
We're very dog friendly on this. And Sam is what kind of dog?
He's a golden retriever, and he's got
he is
unlimited energy. So you might not hear him stop until the end.
Yeah, we have a golden retriever that I think does meth in the backyard.
Well, there you go. I could maybe some calm down. I need some calming drugs for my dog.
You can talk to Eddie.
Yeah, Eddie's got some gummies that he got from Seattle he can bring for you, Zach. But anyway.
Man, I'm tempted.
So as you were pre-Sam, sorry about that.
No, you're good. Yeah, I think it starts with the ownership. Like, I was down in Miami, a couple of days ago, and it's so different how the owners run the team. Some don't even show up for months at a time during the season. Some are very involved. I think that's a huge difference. But in terms of the day-to-day, in terms of the players, the schedule, the coaches, it all can kind of run the same, right? It all feels the same. Everybody has the same type of schedule during the week. Players say the same type of things. It does run the same. But I think from the ownership standpoint, it really jumps out as how different they are, because there's no playbook, and all of them are billionaires, and they all just live very, very different ways.
Go ahead.
Zach Keefer from The Athletic, our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Zach, it was good to see you during the drumstick dash, at least for the first 30 seconds before you actually took off and ran it at Olympic level. But it is a lot of fun, and certainly something that I know you enjoy the run, but also the cause of it as well for Wheeler Mission, and great way to start the holiday. So it was good to see you, and I appreciate the time today.
Yeah, for sure. It's great seeing you on Thanksgiving. Let's catch up soon. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, Zach Keefer and Sam as a cameo, the golden retriever. Golden retrievers are awesome, Jimmy. Do you have a golden, did you say?
A golden doodle, but you can tell by the bark that retriever in them is always active for certain. Judge is always barking at stuff.
I mean, let me tell you something. Golden retrievers are awesome, but they are high energy. There's no doubt about that.
My wife is also very anti-shedding, and regrettably, as much as I love golden retrievers, those big fellas or ladies, they shed a ton. You could have another mini golden retriever based on the amount of hair that they lose as the seasons go by. So probably never a retriever in the cookhouse, but I like the doodles.
So do you think, okay, let's go back to that post from Albert Breer or whatever about the Big Ten title game. Do you think the location of the Big Ten title game is a factor in the ticket prices and the fact that it doesn't look like people are buying up tickets?
No, I don't.
I do understand this point. Now, I don't think it's a relevant point because it would be an outdoor game in Chicago, and I don't think that people want to go sit outdoors in 23-degree weather for a game of which they don't have an invested interest. But it is true that if you are having a game that doesn't have interest of immediacy within the fan base in that market, that you have a higher percentage chance of walk-up sales in an area that has 7 million people in the area as opposed to 2.5 million. I get that.
The only element that I'm willing to hear for why the ticket prices are what they are, and it's not anything to do with it being in Indiana. Either you or Eddie brought this up earlier. I can't remember who did. Because of this title game, this specific Big Ten championship game, not really having stakes. Like, it's for the Big Ten title. I'm not trying to downplay that.
It kind of
is. But everybody's in. Everybody's in the playoff.
You're right.
And if I am...
It's very secondary, right?
Like, if I'm mapping out... Look, we know this as guys if we're trying to plan out whatever, a bros trip, or you're trying to plan out just a fun sport gathering, whatever the case may be. If you're wanting to go to one of these games and you're looking to balance it financially, look, I'm sure there's Penn State, Oregon alums that, whatever, the price doesn't matter, you're going to go. I would be more apt to map out where the quarterfinal is, go to the bowl game versus go to Indiana for a game that has no
again, I go back to
any complications for your record, especially Oregon.
And I'm a Clemson fan, right? My cousin last night texted me and said, "Are you a Clemson basketball fan also?" And I said, I kind of follow in the tournament, and Brad Brownell's an Indiana guy, so yeah. And then I flipped over to watch them, and I wore the sweatshirt today because they beat Kentucky. And I don't know if you know, but anytime Kentucky in basketball loses, Angel gets his wings, right?
I did hear that.
So I was very happy to see that, in fact, Clemson was able to knock off Kentucky last night.
You want a Wildcat? I'll throw a rope on it. Break it down for you.
That's right. So go Tigers in that regard. But when Clemson was really rolling, okay, when they were in the peak Deshaun Watson into Trevor Lawrence years of
late 2010s.
Correct.
Yeah.
When they really had it going, the ACC title game, I mean, it was almost like, oh, I forgot. They've got one more game. Cool. They're going to get to 11 instead of 10, 13 wins or whatever. But my buddy Tony, when I say that I have quote-unquote season tickets for Clemson, I have to be clear here. I bought season tickets and of my own, and in that capacity, one of the years that they were playing in Louisville, because I was a season ticket holder, I was able to buy tickets in the Clemson section at Papa John Stadium. So when I went to that game by myself, by the way, I just happened to be sitting near a guy that I started talking to over the course of the game, and he couldn't believe that I drive down from Indianapolis for games. And so he said, listen, don't buy season tickets. If you really only come to like 3 games a year, just let me know, and we'll figure something out. Well, we've become fast friends. His wife, Diana, and Shannon have become friends. We go to games with them. And so I get tickets through him, is what I'm getting at. All of that to say, when they were going into the college football playoff in those years, Tony and I would strategize along with his buddy Larry, like, okay, ticket-wise, who's going? What are we doing? The ACC title game was never really even a conversation because it was always about, well, we know they're going to be playing on New Year's Eve and then after that in the championship game. And even the semifinal became almost counterproductive because I'm like, wait a minute. Am I really going to go pay to fly to, Arizona or Miami to go watch them in the national semifinal, knowing that if they win that, they've got another game a week later, and that's the one I want to go to in Tampa. And, I mean, none of this was inexpensive. So if you are somebody, unless you're somebody that just has money all over the place, most of these fans are waiting for the playoff games, and this is like a side exhibition, right?
Yeah, especially with this cycle. Like, the only game, ironically enough, you could make the argument for really is one as a fan you'd like to go to. If you're a Clemson fan, I'd want to go to the ACC title game because you have no business being there. Like,
correct.
You thought weeks ago it was done for
that's
you.
Fair. And that's the ceiling for the year, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But if you're a fan of Oregon or Penn State, you're in regardless. Like, I love the Big Ten. I went to Big Ten school, whatever. We're Big Ten country. I get it. But I don't think it has anything to do with it being in Indianapolis or Chicago or wherever. I think it has to do with the fact that in this current season, it's an inconsequential game.
And it's two teams that, have no history really with one another. I realize they played each other in 93, I think, in the year that Penn State should have won the national title game. But, they're not like rivals of one another.
Right.
And, let's not forget, they're also like 2,400 miles apart, right? A bit of a factor. Called in and had called yesterday as well, and I don't believe we got to it. Jimmy's Plays of the Day coming up about 15 minutes from now. Bob joins us on the show real quick. Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm good. I just wanted to call in, you guys, and thank you, Jake, for mentioning yesterday Firefly and saying how you sponsored some of the families. My daughter actually works for Firefly and has for 3 years now, and great organization. So I appreciate you guys giving the accolades to them.
It's a great organization, Bob, and it's one that, thankfully those folks are there because they're heroes in the night, right? And for those that are unfamiliar, it was formerly known as the Children's Bureau, and I appreciate the call, Bob. Firefly, which is located on the west side of Indianapolis, is a facility that when children are in peril or they are surrounded by, whether it be a domestic situation where they have to be removed for their own safety, whether it be an impoverished situation, a displacement of some sort, Firefly is a facility that allows for the kids to residentially have a place to go with trusted individuals to be able to help them and allow them to still go to the same school every day so that their peers and others around them don't know that there has been a change in their life, but other than a temporary situation of stability and support. And many of those children, some of which have mom and dad back in the house, and mom and dad are working with, the facility to get their life in order. But those kids are up for sponsorship for the holidays, and they have a wish list. They make it very easy for you. You can go on. They usually have a wish list that Firefly has connected to Amazon, and you can just select right there and make the selections. It is not overly expensive. You can go above and beyond if you'd like, but very modest Christmas wish list, holiday wish list for the children. They still have now about 400 kids unsponsored, and we are trying to get all of them sponsored by the 11th of December. If you go to Twitter, which is x.com/JakeQuery, or you can always just send me a text. I will send you the link on where you can sponsor a child.
And I know we mentioned this already earlier during the week, but it's not just babies and kids that are there. Plenty of teens as well.
Correct.
I mean,
yeah.
You think about any moment in your life, regardless of the upbringing that you had, getting a gift on Christmas is awesome, regardless of your age. There's plenty of teens in need there, too.
No child should go without one,
right.
regardless of age.
Yep.
Last night, it was brought to my attention, and I listened to it, and I want to bring this up. I watched the Indiana game. They were a little bit sluggish, but then they got going. And the Hoosier Hysterics guys, I think people know the background here, but these are two guys that are rabid Indiana fans. They were the first ones that were at the forefront of creating events and experiences to raise money for NIL. And then I think that in the opinion of the basketball staff, the guys that do Hoosier Hysterics, because of the fact that they were raising money for the NIL, eventually Indiana started doing its own NIL collective. And I think they saw the guys doing the Hoosier Hysterics one as two individuals that not only were doing a collective that was a little bit counterproductive is the wrong word to the one Indiana was doing, but Indiana, once they started doing their own NIL collective, and by collective what I mean by that is, for lack of a better phrase, big bank account, okay? The Hoosier Hysterics guys were kind of the forefront of that. But I think that Indiana felt like they were, and I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I'm just telling you that I think Indiana saw those two individuals as they were getting a little bit uncomfortable as to the access that they were expecting, as if they were kind of buying in their own access. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just telling you I think that was Indiana's interpretation of it. And eventually Mike Woodson was, I think, told that he needed to kind of distance from that and instead channel his energies towards the other NIL collective rather than the one run by the Hoosier Hysterics guys. So as a result of that, the two guys that did the Hoosier Hysterics NIL and do a podcast about Indiana basketball, anything they say that's going to be critical of Indiana basketball is going to be interpreted by people as sour grapes, or they have an axe to grind because these are two guys that one time were going down and doing a bunch of stuff and now they're not. And so, but they did a podcast. They included Brian Evans on it, and they were very critical of Mike Woodson and told different scenarios of Mike Woodson in terms of dropping the ball on recruiting, not being completely invested and dialed into running his program and just kind of like an organized chaos down there. And I will tell you that, and Brian Evans was a part of that as well in terms of the conversation. They didn't tell anything that I think is untrue. I think that they were – it sounds to me like the people that they've talked to are similar to like people I've talked to, and they went much further on information I've been given. But if you are somebody that's a fan of Indiana basketball or has concern about the direction of Indiana basketball, I do think that the allegations that are now very out there and none of it was overly insipid, but just stuff of lack of attention of detail for Mike Woodson, notably in the area of recruiting, of not knowing recruits' names or not following up with additional phone calls or not staying in contact with kids that have an interest in Indiana or vice versa. And that is all stuff that I have as well heard pretty reliably. And that's not to say that Indiana is too far gone, but to say that this is a season for Indiana now where they've got to get things turned around and show that Louisville and Gonzaga are the anomaly and not the norm. And if they don't do that, then I think at the end of the year, if this is a year where Indiana again appears to underperform with a bunch of players that are some of them making $500,000 to $1 million to just over $1 million on that roster, if with that money does not come the understanding of what it means to play for Indiana and the cohesiveness that is necessary to win games, then I think Indiana at the end of the season, even with a director of the Board of Trustees that is very close with Mike Woodson, even with very influential alumni that are very close to Mike Woodson, at the end of the year, if things don't get turned around, then I think Indiana is going to have to answer to a lot of different things.
The stories, the rumors, the rumblings about recruiting, those have all been stories that I've heard as well. I will tell you, if you're an Indiana fan frustrated by this is a deciding year. If they miss the tournament, which would be the third time in his tenure and back-to-back seasons with a team and in a conference where Fanta said it earlier, you should be able to it should recruit itself. You should be in the tournament every year. It's going to work itself out if that is the case.
By the way, we mentioned earlier the situation that happened. Has Emily called in, Eddie, to clear her name here? So I think I mentioned earlier, I was doing this podcast, and these two fellows that I'm doing the podcast with say, oh, yeah, we've got a picture here of you and your wife. And I said, well, we've been dating a long time, but it's not my wife. And then they pull it up, and I turn around, and it's a picture of Emily and I. So then I get curious, and we did this earlier, this experiment where we Googled Jake Query wife because, I routinely sit around and Google myself. And I Googled Jake Query wife, and the first 3 images that come up are myself and Emily Longnecker, which is flattering. But, Emily, what we've determined here is that I think you're screwing around with the algorithms on the interwebs, right?
Lies, all lies. No, I don't even know how to work algorithms. I don't even know. No, lies, all lies, sir. But hilarious that, my apologies to Shannon because I love her. And,
she was a good sport about this, by the way.
I'm sure she was, seeing as I adore her and we hang out. So I hope that she knows that, look, that's the interweb. That has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me.
So you're saying you two are beating the home wrecking allegations here? Like we're good now? Like
Emily and I are dear friends, right? But there's no funny business going on here, right, Emily? This is all on the up and up, right?
Love you like a brother, man. I mean, we've had some wonderful, wonderful laughs. But no.
But we're not married. We're not even secretly married, right?
No, not secretly married, not secretly dating, not sneaky link or whatever the kids call it now.
Never been to Vegas at the same time? No Elvis Chapel or anything like that?
Nothing,
okay,
right? That I know of. Okay, Emily, let me ask you this. Here's the $1 million question. You ready? And this one's really going to make you uncomfortable. Are you ready?
Please. Okay, go ahead.
This snafu that the Google has come up with that for whatever reason now has the two of us married, this snafu, while fun, truthfully is more flattering to which of the two of us?
I mean, I think you should. I think it's. Well, let's see. Does it make you look better or make me look better?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Should we? Look, we should ask these guys. Which one? Who does it look better for? It kind of here's the thing. It kind of makes me look a little bit like, I don't know. It makes you look like a home wrecker, and it makes me look like you know what I mean, like
a player.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like a player. Right, exactly. Yeah, well, no.
My takeaway is if we ever doubted it before, it just screams the level of game Jake has. I think that's what the algorithm
my
is. Shut out
gosh.
there. I think that's what happened.
Okay. No, I think, Emily, here's the thing. Deep down, I think you're screwing with the algorithms. I'm sticking with that.
Oh, Lord. Even though I come to Thanksgiving every year with your family, although I missed it this year. My apologies.
That is true, yes.
My apologies.
I don't know. Listen, it's a fun snafu, and I appreciate you being a good sport, and Shannon got a laugh out of it as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we cleared the air, right?
No, I love it. You want to know why? Because you've been such a wonderful friend to me over the years, Jake, and I really, really appreciate it. So we've had so many laughs. So at the end of the day, it's hilarious. I'm not surprised that the interweb would come up with something crazy like that.
I'm telling you, they're listening to the phone conversations, and they know we talk about Brady Bunch, and they're like, the only two people that would talk about Brady Bunch would have to be married to one another. So boom, there you go.
I mean, all the Brady Bunch trivia you can imagine.
All right, Emily, I know you're busy there at Channel 13, so we'll let you get back to work, all right?
Okay. All right. Peace.
Emily Longnecker from WTHR to clear the air.
I think there's an open seat at Jake Query's Thanksgiving next year.
We'll come back and do our plays of the day with Jimmy, and we'll do it next.
Today's plays of the day focus entirely on college basketball. We had John Fanta on earlier, and he highlighted this on Twitter. You have ranked matchups galore with different conference battles going on, those cross matchups, SEC, Big 12, the whole nine going on tonight. Let's
the
start
ACC
first.
SEC challenge is going
Yes,
on, right?
correct. Yes. And for starters, even though they have wronged me early on in the season, I am going to back UConn to right the ship and win on the money line tonight. They host Baylor. That taking place at 6:30. A little bit later, I'll take the over 174.5 between Alabama and North Carolina with the SEC ACC challenge taking place there. Kansas is at Creighton. I'll lay the 4 on the Jayhawks. They're favored by 4 on the road against Creighton. Auburn's at Duke. They're 3.5-point dogs. I'll scoop the 3.5 there on the Tigers. Last one for you. USC, 6-point dogs at home against Oregon. I will scoop the 6 there for the Trojans. Eddie, any plays for you today?
I was also on that UNC Alabama over because both of those teams like to score and don't play defense.
Yep.
So I could see that honestly being a 90-80 game.
Who will be the last team to lose in college basketball this season? We're down to already like fair. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if I had to guess, I'd say there are 12 teams left, right?
Well, the field hasn't been set yet, so we don't know who's going to be the last team to lose.
What do you mean?
You talking about the NCAA tournament field?
Yes, he said the last team to lose.
I think he said undefeated team. Did he not include that caveat in there?
I
Who
didn't-
will be the
if
last
so,
team
I
to
didn't hear
lose? Who will be the last undefeated to lose a game?
I don't even know who's left.
You got Kansas, Auburn, Tennessee, Kentucky, Marquette,
I mean, there's
Wisconsin,
a lot.
or there's quite a few.
Check the
but
schedules. What's the schedules look like? What's Tennessee's schedule?
I mean, that's the variable, right?
because I think Auburn's got Purdue.
Auburn has
Auburn's-
Duke tonight.
Duke tonight.
On the
Purdue
road.
coming up. Kansas. God, I hate Kansas.
I mean, Rhode Island
Ugh.
is undefeated. Loyola's undefeated. How good are those? Is the Atlantic 10 and how good
Rhode
are those
Island's
teams?
unbeaten.
Apparently, yeah.
That's Archie's team.
Archie Miller, undefeated. So we can cross them off as being a possibility.
No, I think he got fired.
I'm
Did he
pretty
get
sure.
fired?
I'm pretty sure he did too. Now that you say
Where
that,
is
they
he
were
now?
pretty bad last year.
That's why they're undefeated then.
That's right.
No, he
mean,
is still there.
That's what I thought.
All right, how about it?
So they're undefeated because of him.
Oregon. It's not going to be Oregon because they're going to get into conference play, right? Okay, here we UC Irvine, the Anteaters, baby.
Think so?
Zoit, yep, I've got a UC Irvine shirt. When they lose, I'll come in and wear my UC Irvine shirt. That's my pick, though. Columbia also 8-0. Maybe it's Columbia.
Columbia.
John, what's going on?
No, nothing. Trying to figure out the Pacers, right? Man, Halliburton. That reminded me, I give a lot of analogies from Apollo 13. It reminded me of Apollo 13 when he was answering that question last night from them not getting the procedure. And when Swigert said, they don't know how to do it.
Well,
They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to fix this right now.
Correct. Halliburton, to me, sounded broken after that game when he's
Yeah,
like, look, it's embarrassing.
I think they're clueless on how to fix this right now. I really do.
Utah State, that's who I'm going to predict is going to be the last team to lose. Utah State, they're 7-0.
Where'd their coach go? Washington? Utah State?
Yeah, because they had a really good year. Was it last year or 2 years
last
ago?
year
They
they played
were.
Purdue last year in the tournament, right?
That's right, yeah. But they're 7-0. There's my pick. So you'll be talking Pacers
Yeah.
upcoming here till the end of the show. What else you got lined up?
What are we doing? Joe writes. Joe's on today. Hell yeah.
You sound excited.
I'm very excited.
Please
Did
maintain
you
your
have
level
a
of
lot of
enthusiasm.
excitement today, too? Were you guys excited? What is all this crap right here?
I don't know. What is
Look at
it?
Great
this.
question. It's not mine.
Those are probably Andy's notes, right?
That's Pat
Easy
Boylan's
to...
notes.
Who's?
Those are Pat Boylan's notes from last night.
Oh, are they? They're not Swebo's notes?
What should we read Boylan's notes?
Get
and see
a
what it says.
Wear one of my 35 hats.
By the way, thank you to Adam Rittenberg, John Fanta, Dustin
Not on the page anymore.
Dopirak, and Zach Keefer for joining us.
What a dismount.
Tomorrow, Dave Revson, and we're going to talk to a former IU football great, right?
Tevin Coleman
Tevin
tomorrow.
Coleman going to join us tomorrow as well to
Coleman.
talk about the Hoosiers and the college football playoff. John's up next. We appreciate you listening to Aquarian Company.